Annie Hayessuit's hand trembled slightly as she adjusted the strange device in Corey's ear. The noise of the restaurant, the clatter of plates, the murmur of distant conversations had always been a distant, frustrating hum to him. But tonight, for the first time in his 11 years, Corey Carter wasn't just hearing the world around him. He was feeling it. Corey's eyes widened in confusion as the vibrations started to pulse beneath his skin, reaching his heart, his chest, his very soul. His mother had always told him there was a way out of the silence that held him captive, but he never imagined it would feel like this. "Corey?" Annie's voice was low, steady, though her pulse raced. She had kept this secret for far too long. As a single mother raising a son with a condition that defied all medical explanation, Annie had carried a burden that no one else knew about. But now, as Corey turned to her, his expression caught somewhere between wonder and disbelief. The moment of truth had come. The impossible was happening, and she had no idea how long it would last. Across the table, Todd Carter, Corey's father, watched in stony silence. The Admiral had always been a man of action, of strategy, of control. But here, with his son's world of silence beginning to fracture, Todd could do nothing but watch, a growing unease settling in his chest. And as Corey's fingers instinctively moved to touch his ear once more, Annie felt a cold ripple of fear rush through her. What had she done? What had she unleashed? Then, in the distance, a soft but unmistakable rumble, a warning, perhaps. Todd's gaze flicked to the door. The military wasn't far behind, and neither were the consequences of this uncharted power. Annie's secret was no longer just her own. It had become something far larger, something that could change the course of history. Before we continue, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more exciting stories that you won't want to miss. The hum of the restaurant seemed to dissolve into a quiet, otherworldly sound, one that wasn't like any noise Corey had heard before. At first, he thought it was the low thrum of the music playing in the background, but it wasn't the same. His eyes widened as the sensation pulsed through him, like waves crashing gently against the shore, vibrating through his skin, his bones. He looked up at Annie, whose hand was still on his ear, and then to Todd, whose face had transformed from skepticism to awe. "Mom?" Corey whispered, his voice trembling as he felt the vibrations dance through his body, unlike anything he could describe. Annie's heart raced, her breath catching in her throat. She had been waiting for this moment for so long, but now that it had arrived, a rush of fear and hope collided inside her. She watched as Corey's fingers moved to his ear again, trying to make sense of what was happening. The sensation was not like hearing, not like what other people experienced. It was as though the world itself had become a symphony of vibrations, each sound not entering through his ears, but flowing through him, directly into his senses. She could see the confusion on his face, but there was something else there too, wonder. "It's okay, Corey," Annie said softly, squeezing his hand. "You're not imagining it. You're hearing, just not in the way others do." Corey looked up at her, his expression a mix of awe and uncertainty. "But how? How can I hear, like this?" he asked. Annie swallowed hard. There was no easy way to explain. She had kept this secret from him for so long, and now, in the quiet moments of this restaurant, the truth was beginning to surface. "It's a gift, Corey, one that was meant for you." Corey's gaze flicked between Annie and Todd, searching for answers. Todd had been silent up until now, his face unreadable as he processed what was unfolding before him. Annie's words had pierced through his military-trained composure, but there was a question that kept echoing in his mind. How? And why now? He had watched his son struggle with the silence for years, desperate for answers that never came. But seeing Corey's expression now, as he seemed to grasp at something beyond his comprehension, made the air feel heavier. Todd leaned forward, his voice low, almost a whisper. "What did you do, Annie?" Annie hesitated. She had always known that this moment would come, that Todd would eventually find out. Her past, the secrets she had buried, were no longer just hers to keep. The object she had pulled from Corey's ear wasn't something ordinary, nor was it something she could explain in simple terms. It was a piece of her own history, a history she had tried to outrun for years. "It's not just a hearing device, Todd," Annie began, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding in her chest. It's a tuning device, one that's been in my family for generations. Corey looked up at her, his confusion deepening. A tuning device, he echoed, his voice full of skepticism. Annie nodded. Yes, but it's not just any tuning device. It was part of a project I was involved in, a government project. They called it sensory enhancement. It's something that changes how the body processes sound, vibration, everything around it. It amplifies what's already there. She paused, a chill creeping down her spine as she realized just how dangerous this revelation might be. Corey, this device, it's more powerful than you think. And it's the reason why you can hear now. Todd's face turned ashen. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of her words settling heavily between them. You were part of a project like that? His voice was hoarse with disbelief. Why didn't you tell me? Annie closed her eyes, not wanting to see the accusation in his eyes. She had always known that this moment would come, but it was more than she could bear to face right now. I couldn't, Todd. I couldn't risk it. The project, it was dangerous. The things we were doing were beyond what anyone should have been involved in. And when I left, I thought I could keep Corey safe from all of it. Todd's mind raced as he processed Annie's words. He was a military man through and through, trained to think with precision, to control the unknown. But the situation in front of him was anything but controllable. The device Annie had activated wasn't just a relic of some covert military operation. It was the very thing that had changed their lives in a way he couldn't even begin to understand. You kept this from me all these years, Todd murmured, his voice betraying the hurt that he was trying to suppress. And now my son has this power? His eyes darted to Corey, who was still processing everything. Annie didn't respond immediately. She had always kept her past hidden, both from Todd and from Corey, but now it was impossible to ignore. The device had connected Corey to a power that was as dangerous as it was extraordinary. It had the potential to change everything, but with that change came an unimaginable risk. Corey isn't just hearing, Todd, Annie said quietly, meeting his gaze. He's feeling the world in ways no one should be able to. And if the wrong people get their hands on this, it won't just change his life. It could change everything. And not for the better. Todd's military instincts flared, but this wasn't a battlefield. There were no clear rules, no defined enemy to fight. For the first time in his career, he was facing something he couldn't control, something that had emerged from his own past. What does this mean for him, Annie? He asked. What does it mean for us? His voice was a mixture of fear and disbelief. Annie took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. It means that our lives just became much more dangerous, and we need to decide what to do with this power before it's too late. Corey's gaze shifted between his parents, his confusion still etched across his face. Mom, what do you mean? His voice was soft, almost afraid. Is it true? Can I really hear now? Annie nodded slowly. You can, but it's not the same as what other people hear. What you're feeling is something much deeper. You're tapping into a frequency that's beyond what anyone else can understand. And you have to be careful, Corey. Todd shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his mind still racing as the implications of what was happening sank in. He had always thought that Corey's condition, his deafness, was something to be fixed with science, something that could be corrected. But now he realized that Corey's silence was only a small part of the story. There were forces at play that neither he nor Annie fully understood, and they had only just scratched the surface of what Corey was capable of. The military would stop at nothing to take control of this power, and the family was caught in the middle. Annie's expression grew hard as she turned to Todd. The government will come for us, Todd. They'll come for Corey. They'll want that device back, and they'll stop at nothing to get it. We can't let that happen. Todd stared at her for a moment, his jaw tightening. We won't let it happen, he said finally, his voice steady but filled with an edge of determination. But we need a plan. Corey, still holding on to his newfound ability, looked out the restaurant window, feeling the weight of his mother's words. He wasn't just a deaf boy anymore. He was something else entirely. But what did that mean for his future? For their future? As the world outside the restaurant continued without them, Annie, Todd, and Corey knew that their lives had changed forever. And they were no longer just a family. They were fugitives, running from the past and the secrets that had been hidden for so long. The question was no longer if they could survive what was coming, but what they would become in the process. Corey's hands shook as the world around him shifted into something he couldn't yet comprehend. He was acutely aware of every vibration, every subtle change in the air, like the beat of a distant drum, but louder, stronger. The glass on the table in front of him hummed as a waiter passed by, and Corey instinctively reached out to touch it, feeling the vibrations travel up his arm. He wasn't just hearing, he was experiencing, as if the very molecules in the air were singing, vibrating with life. Each movement in the room seemed to create a ripple, sending tremors through his skin, like a pulse from an unseen force. Annie watched him closely, her hand still resting gently on his. She could see the confusion and wonder in his eyes as his mind tried to make sense of the sensations flooding in. It was more than she had ever hoped for, but it was also more than she had prepared for. The tuning device she had activated was working, but not in the way she had expected. Instead of simply giving Corey a normal hearing experience, it had unlocked something far more profound, an entirely new dimension of perception. "Corey," she said softly, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her, "breathe. It's okay. This is you. This is your gift." She watched as he tried to focus, his hands trembling as he held his breath, feeling the world through his skin. She had known this moment would come, but witnessing it unfold was overwhelming. Corey's confusion was mirrored by the wonder in his eyes as he processed what was happening to him. The world had always been silent for him, but now it was alive in a way he never thought possible. Corey's gaze darted around the restaurant, his head jerking slightly as he registered the different sounds. The low hum of the refrigerator in the corner, the quiet clink of silverware on plates, and even the soft murmur of distant conversations. It was as if he could hear everything at once, and it was too much, too fast. His breath quickened as the noise seemed to grow louder and louder in his mind, overwhelming him. Annie immediately sensed his distress and moved closer, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "Focus on me, Corey. It's okay," she said gently, her voice grounding him. She guided him to focus on her own voice, calming the swirling storm of sensations in his head. She had always known her son had the potential to hear, but this was something beyond her understanding. She watched Corey, feeling a deep mix of relief and fear. This ability, this gift, was changing him, changing everything. As the minutes passed, Corey's breathing began to steady. The overwhelming sensations were still there, but they no longer felt like an intrusion. Instead, they felt like something he could control, or at least begin to understand. Annie stayed by his side, offering gentle words of encouragement, guiding him through each new experience. She explained the sounds he could feel, the rhythmic pulse of the air, the vibrations of objects, the hum of life all around him. Corey nodded, trying to focus, his eyes now intent on the world as it unfolded in front of him. Todd sat across from them, watching in stunned silence. He had been prepared for some kind of breakthrough, but this was beyond his understanding. The stoic military man who had always relied on logic and reason was now confronted with something that defied all known science. Corey wasn't just hearing. He was experiencing a new reality, one where sound wasn't just something that entered the ears, but something that was felt, understood on a deeper, more primal level. Todd's mind raced as he processed what was happening, but his instinct as a father, a protector, told him one thing: they were no longer safe. The world, as he had known it, would never be the same. Corey's voice broke through the silence, a hesitant whisper. "I feel it, Mom. It's like everything is alive. Like I can feel the air." Annie smiled softly, her eyes brimming with tears. She hadn't expected him to understand so quickly, but it was clear now that her son was no longer the boy who lived in silence. He was something more, something extraordinary. But even as joy filled her heart, she couldn't ignore the underlying fear that gnawed at her. How long would this last? And more importantly, what would happen when the military came for them? Annie squeezed Corey's hand gently, trying to steady herself. "This is your gift, Corey. You can feel the world like no one else. It's not just about hearing. It's about understanding. Corey looked at her, his face filled with both wonder and confusion. But why me? Why now? He asked. Annie's gaze softened, but the weight of her secret hung heavily between them. I don't know, Corey, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But we're going to figure it out together. Todd finally spoke, his voice tight. We need to move, he said, his military mind already switching into overdrive. The longer we stay here, the more likely it is that someone will notice. His eyes flicked to the door as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment. Annie nodded, understanding the urgency in his voice. As much as she wanted to savor this moment with Corey, she knew they couldn't afford to stay exposed for long. We'll leave tonight, she said, standing up from the table, her mind already racing with the logistics of escape. We'll get to a safe place, and we'll figure this out. Corey looked up at her, his face a mixture of fear and excitement. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he knew one thing for sure. The world had just changed, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for what that meant. What happens now? He asked softly. Annie's heart clenched at the uncertainty in his voice. Now, Corey, we keep going. We stick together. And we protect this gift, whatever it is. She looked at Todd, her resolve firming as she said, We'll keep you safe, no matter what it takes. As they stood together, ready to leave the restaurant, Annie couldn't help but glance at Corey one last time, her heart full of a mixture of pride and fear. The boy she had known for so long, the boy trapped in silence, was no longer just her son. He was something more, something the world had never seen before. But with that new power came danger, and Annie knew they would have to be ready for whatever was coming next. What do you think Corey's new ability means for his future? Do you think it's a blessing or a curse? If you're enjoying the story so far, make sure to subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear how you think Corey's journey will unfold next. The weight of the world shifted in an instant. The moment Corey's world began to fill with sound, their lives as they knew it came to an end. It wasn't long before the whispers started, rumors of a boy who could hear the world without ever having heard a single word. Someone somewhere had noticed. Annie had always been cautious, always kept her eyes open for signs of the past creeping back into their lives. But now, as the days dragged on, the quiet terror of the military's attention began to feel inevitable. Todd's military instincts kicked in almost immediately. He was used to keeping control, to staying one step ahead, but this was something different. The past had caught up with them faster than he could have ever imagined. The government was coming for them, for Corey, and Todd had no idea how they'd be able to escape this time. The tension was building, growing like a pressure cooker, and there was nowhere to run. The object Annie had activated wasn't just an ancient relic, it was a piece of classified military technology, one with the power to change everything. And the government wanted it back. We need to move, now, Todd said, his voice low and commanding, the hardened military officer taking over. He had no doubt that the military would stop at nothing to retrieve the tuning device. They were already tracking them, using every resource at their disposal to hunt them down. Todd's mind raced through possible escape routes, planning their next move. But even as he made these plans, a gnawing sense of guilt settled in his chest. This wasn't just about protecting his family anymore. It was about protecting Corey from a force that he had once been a part of, one he didn't fully understand. His involvement in the project, the experiments that had led to Corey's condition, was haunting him. Annie's hands trembled as she packed a bag, trying to keep her composure in front of Corey. She had spent years running from her past, trying to outrun the mistakes she had made. But now it was impossible to hide from the truth. The object had unleashed something far more dangerous than she had anticipated, and the consequences of her actions were far-reaching. The government wasn't just after the tuning device. They wanted to harness its power, to use it for their own purposes. They had always been obsessed with controlling sensory enhancement, and now that Corey had experienced it, they would stop at nothing to reclaim him. Annie sat down next to Corey, her eyes searching his face for any sign of fear. She had always tried to protect him from the darker parts of her world, but now it was clear that Corey had inherited more than just her bloodline. He had inherited a power that could change the world, and the world wasn't ready for it. "Corey, listen to me," she said softly, her voice firm but loving. "You're safe with us. We won't let them take you. I promise." Corey nodded, though his eyes were wide with fear. He didn't understand fully what was happening, but he could feel the change in the air. The warmth of the sun streaming through the window felt different, like it was charged with energy. Everything around him seemed to hum with life in a way it never had before. But even as he marveled at his newfound abilities, he could sense his parents' growing tension, the fear they were trying to hide from him. He didn't know what was coming, but he could feel it deep in his bones. Annie placed a hand on Corey's shoulder, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision she knew she had to make. "We're going to leave," she said. "We have to stay ahead of them." Todd looked at her sharply, his expression filled with concern. "Annie, we cannot run them forever. They know what we've got now. They'll keep coming for us." But Annie shook her head, determination set in her features. "We don't have a choice. If they get their hands on Corey's ability, they'll use him as a weapon. We can't let that happen." Todd's eyes narrowed, his mind calculating the risk. He was torn between the duty he had sworn to the military and the love he felt for his family. His entire career had been built on loyalty, on following orders, but now the lines had blurred. The military had always taught him that duty came first, but his son, his flesh and blood, came above everything else. The realization struck him like a physical blow. He couldn't just stand by and let them take Corey. He would have to fight no matter the cost. The doorbell rang, and Annie's breath caught in her throat. They weren't alone anymore. Todd's eyes shot to the window, and he immediately began to move toward the back door. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice hard and commanding. Annie moved quickly to follow him, but he stopped her with a look. "I'll handle this." She nodded, but fear gripped her chest. The situation was spiraling faster than they could control. The military's reach was far greater than they had anticipated, and soon, they would be on the run for good. Todd stepped out the back door and into the alley, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew they were coming, the government agents, the military's heavy hand, and he had no idea how far they would go to get what they wanted. His breath came in shallow gasps as he moved quickly, scanning the street for any sign of danger. A black car rolled up slowly, its windows tinted dark, and Todd knew immediately that it was them. The agents had arrived, and there was no way out of this. The car stopped, and two men in dark suits stepped out. Todd's instincts kicked in, but before he could react, one of them spoke. "Admiral Carter," the man said, his voice cold and detached. "We've been looking for you. We need to talk about your son." The words hit Todd like a physical blow. His son. They knew about Corey now. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. The military was no longer just a threat. It had become their enemy. And Todd Carter, a man who had always served his country with honor, was about to make a choice that would change everything. The moment they left their home, a suffocating sense of urgency gripped the family. Todd, Annie, and Corey were no longer living the life they had known just hours ago. They were fugitives, hunted by the very organization Todd had once sworn allegiance to. The tuning device that had granted Corey the ability to hear, and more, now served as their only shield. They used it to mask their movements, emitting frequencies that distorted the air around them, making them invisible to tracking technology. But even as they fled, the weight of being hunted hung heavy over them, a constant, looming presence that never left their minds. Annie moved quickly through the back streets, her eyes darting nervously as she adjusted the device in her bag. She had always kept one step ahead of her past, but now there was no running from it. Every corner they turned, every shadow they passed, could be hiding someone from the military, someone who had been sent to track them down. Corey, his face still a mix of awe and confusion from his newfound ability, walked beside her, clinging to her hand as if it could somehow anchor him to the present. He had so many questions, but there was no time for answers. They were too far gone to stop now. Todd had fallen behind, his mind a whirlpool of thoughts, none of them comforting. Every step he took away from their home, every breath he took in the fresh air of freedom, only added to his growing guilt. He had been part of the project that led to Corey's deafness, part of the very government experiments that had used his son as a pawn in their pursuit of power. Now, Corey's condition had turned into something far more dangerous, something that threatened not just their family, but the entire world. Todd couldn't stop the self-loathing that gripped him, the realization that he had played a pivotal role in creating this nightmare. His son wasn't just a victim of nature, he was a product of his own choices. The guilt gnawed at Todd, and with it, an overwhelming sense of betrayal. He had once believed in the mission, in the purpose of his work. But now, as he watched Corey struggle to understand his own abilities, as he saw the fear in Annie's eyes, the mission seemed like a distant lie. The project, the government's experiments, had caused more harm than good. Todd had been too blinded by duty to see it, too wrapped up in the idea of serving his country to realize the damage it would do to his family. But now, with the military closing in on them, he couldn't deny that his past actions had led them to this moment. He had betrayed Annie, betrayed Corey, and ultimately, betrayed everything he had once believed in. Annie looked over at Todd as they reached a small alley, her voice tight with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked, her words cutting through the tension between them. Todd didn't respond immediately, his gaze fixed on the empty street ahead. He didn't know how to explain the storm that was raging inside him. He had spent his entire life making decisions based on orders, on what was best for the greater good. But the greater good had never included his son. Corey had always been a casualty of that larger plan, and now Todd was watching his own son become a weapon, a target of the very force he had once been loyal to. "I'm sorry," Todd said, his voice breaking the silence. "I'm so sorry, Annie. This is all my fault." Annie stopped walking and turned to face him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, there was no sound but the distant hum of traffic, the normal rhythm of life continuing outside their frantic, secretive escape. Then, slowly, she shook her head. "No, Todd," she said quietly. "This is not just your fault. It's on all of us." She reached out and took his hand, her grip firm. "We're in this together. And we'll get through it. But not if we keep blaming ourselves." Corey looked up at them, his face filled with a mixture of confusion and fear. "What's going to happen to us, Mom?" he asked, his voice trembling. Annie knelt down beside him, her heart breaking at the vulnerability in his voice. She pulled him into a tight hug, feeling his small body shake against hers. "We're going to be okay, Corey," she whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "We'll find a place where they can't find us." But deep down, Annie knew that wasn't the truth. The military would find them, and when they did, they would stop at nothing to take Corey back. The weight of their reality settled around them, a suffocating fog of fear and guilt that pressed in on all sides. Todd's military instincts kicked in again, and he began scanning the alley for escape routes. "We need to keep moving," he said, his voice low and urgent. "The longer we stay in one place, the more likely we are to get caught." Annie nodded, pulling herself together as best she could. She grabbed Corey's hand again, her other hand clutching the bag that contained the tuning device. The same device that had brought them here, to the brink of destruction. As they continued to move through the streets, the distant hum of helicopters filled the air, a constant reminder that they were being hunted. Todd's mind raced with possible plans, but none of them seemed like enough. He had been a man of power, a man who had commanded troops and led missions. But now he was just a father, trying to protect his son. And for the first time in his life, he felt completely powerless. As they turned the corner, Annie caught sight of a black car parked at the end of the street. Her heart stopped. "They're here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Todd's eyes narrowed as he took in the car's darkened windows. "We don't have much time," he said. He pulled Annie and Corey into a narrow alley, away from the car's line of sight, his heart racing. "We need to move fast. Keep your heads down." But as they moved, the sound of footsteps behind them grew louder, echoing in the narrow alley. Someone was following them. Annie's pulse quickened, and she glanced back over her shoulder. The fear she had tried to keep hidden from Corey bubbled to the surface. They were closing in. "We have to run," Todd said, his voice firm. The family broke into a sprint, the weight of the tuning device in Annie's bag feeling like 1,000 pounds. Every step was a race against time, a race against the people who wanted to take everything from them. But even as they ran, Annie couldn't help but wonder if it was already too late. What do you think Todd should do next? How can he protect his family when he feels so guilty about his past actions? If you're enjoying the suspense of Todd's struggle, hit that subscribe button. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the family can outrun the military, or will they have to face their past head-on? The days of running were taking their toll. The family had moved from one safe house to the next, always on the move, always looking over their shoulders. The hum of military helicopters grew louder each time they passed through unfamiliar streets, their blackened silhouettes casting long shadows over their already fragile lives. Todd could feel the pressure mounting, the constant vigilance draining his resolve. It had been days since they'd last rested properly, and every step felt heavier than the last. The relentless pursuit was no longer just a distant threat. It was here, in every corner, in every unfamiliar face they passed. The military's reach had grown far beyond their control. The phone calls Todd received from his superiors had become increasingly urgent, each one a reminder of the world he had left behind, the world that now demanded answers. He had known this moment would come, but he had never imagined it would feel so suffocating, so invasive. Each conversation felt like a tightrope walk between duty and betrayal, between his role as a father and his past as an officer in a covert military project. His loyalty to the government had been absolute once, but now, as the stakes rose higher with each passing day, he found himself questioning everything he had believed in. The thought gnawed at him, tormenting him as he lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling of yet another dimly lit room. Should he betray his family to protect them? The question felt wrong, even to his hardened military mind. But his superiors were growing impatient, and the military's grip on them was tightening. If they were going to survive, they needed to stay one step ahead, but every day it felt less and less possible. The cold, calculating part of Todd's mind told him that he could offer the military a way to track down the tuning device, the very object that had changed Corey's life. But in doing so, he would lose everything that mattered: his son, his family, his future. His loyalty was being tested in ways he had never imagined. Annie's eyes followed Todd as he paced back and forth in their small, dimly lit room. She knew the internal struggle he was facing. She had seen it in his eyes, the way he fought with the weight of his past, the pressure of duty, and the fierce desire to protect their son. For days, she had been preparing herself for the inevitable: Todd's choice. She had always known that their lives together had been built on lies, on secrets, and now those secrets were tearing them apart. She couldn't wait any longer. She had to act. Corey, who had been silent for most of the evening, suddenly spoke up, his voice shaky with fear. "Mom? What's going to happen to us?" His words hit Annie like a physical blow, the weight of his innocence pressing down on her chest. She moved over to him, crouching down to meet his eyes. "We're going to be okay, Corey," she said, her voice steady, but the words felt hollow even as they left her lips. "We'll find a way through this. We have to. I promise." But deep down, Annie knew the truth. The truth that had been growing inside her for days, ever since the military had started closing in. The only way to protect Corey, to protect them all, was to confront the people who were hunting them down. She couldn't hide from her past anymore. It had come for them, and now it was time to face it. She had spent years running from the very project that had created the tuning device, the project that had made Corey into something extraordinary. But now, with the military at their doorstep, she had no choice but to confront it head-on. Todd stopped pacing, his gaze locked on Annie. He knew what she was about to say. "You're thinking about going to them, aren't you?" His voice was strained, filled with fear for what she might do. Annie met his gaze, her expression resolute. "I don't have a choice, Todd. We don't have a choice. We can't keep running. If we do, they'll track us down until they have Corey in their hands. And then we won't have anything left." Todd's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "And what do you expect to happen when you walk into their hands?" he asked bitterly. "You think they'll just let us go? You think they'll just leave us alone?" Annie's eyes softened, and she reached out to touch his arm. "I'm not walking into their hands, Todd. I'm walking in with the one thing they need, the one thing they think will give them control. But they don't know everything. They don't know what Corey can do, what that device can do." Todd shook his head, the guilt still hanging over him like a shadow. Annie, I've been part of this. I've been part of everything that's led us here. You're talking about confronting them, but I'm the one who helped create all of this. I'm the reason Corey's like this. His voice broke, the weight of his own culpability evident in his expression. I can't ask you to do that. I can't risk losing you too. Annie took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. We've already lost Todd. If we don't act now, we'll lose everything. Corey deserves more than this. Her voice was fierce now, filled with the determination she had carried for so long. We're not going to lose him. Not to them. Not to the military. And I'll do whatever it takes to protect him. You have to trust me. Todd stared at her for a long moment, the battle in his eyes still unresolved. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he nodded. I trust you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll do whatever it takes to protect Corey. But I don't know what will happen after this. I don't know if we'll ever be the same again. Annie nodded, knowing that what lay ahead would change everything. We'll face it together, she said softly. She turned to Corey, who had been watching them both in silence. Are you ready, Corey? We're going to fight for you, for us. Corey looked up at her, his face filled with both fear and courage. I'm ready, Mom, he said, his voice steady, the weight of his newfound abilities settling over him like a heavy cloak. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in his life, he felt like he had something to fight for. His family. As the night settled in around them, the finality of their decision began to take hold. They were no longer running from the past. They were running toward a confrontation that would determine their future, a confrontation with the very force that had created their world of silence, and now, their world of sound. The sharp clang of boots echoed through the narrow corridor as Todd and Annie hurried through the dimly lit hall. They had barely enough time to grab their things before the military closed in, surrounding the building they had been hiding in. The reality of the situation hit them hard. There was no more running. The military was here, and they had finally found them. Todd's mind raced as he formulated a plan, but nothing felt like enough. The object, the tuning device, was the only thing standing between them and certain capture. But in that moment, it also felt like the most dangerous thing they had. Annie's hand gripped Todd's arm, her voice barely above a whisper. We can't let them take it, Todd. They'll use it to control him. Corey, standing by her side, was still processing the whirlwind of events, his face pale with fear. His newfound abilities, the very reason they were being hunted, now seemed like a curse. Annie's heart clenched as she looked at her son, wondering if she could protect him from the chaos she had unknowingly unleashed. The military wouldn't stop until they had that device and her son's power in their grasp. Todd's breath caught in his throat as he turned to face Annie. The weight of the choice before him was suffocating. The mission, the military, his oath to serve had always been clear, duty above all else. But now, with his family caught in the crossfire, the lines between right and wrong were no longer so easily defined. Todd had spent his entire career obeying orders, never questioning his role in the greater machine. But now, standing with Annie and Corey, everything he had once believed and felt distant, foreign even. His loyalty to the military, to the government, was being tested in ways he never imagined. As the sound of distant voices grew louder, the family's escape was growing increasingly impossible. Todd's instincts screamed at him to act, to protect them at any cost. But what was the cost of defying everything he had worked for? What would the military do to them if he refused to comply? Todd turned to Annie, his jaw tightening as he made the decision. I can't let them take him, Annie. I won't let them use him like this. Annie's eyes met his, her own resolve hardening. She had known this day would come, but it didn't make the decision any easier. We've been running from this for too long, she said, her voice low but steady. It's time to face it head-on. She turned to Corey, who looked at her with wide eyes, his expression a mixture of fear and hope. Corey, this is it. We need to destroy the device. We can't let them get their hands on it. Todd's heart clenched at the thought of what that would mean. The device, the very thing that had unlocked Corey's ability to hear, was also the key to their survival. Without it, they would be defenseless. But deep down, Todd knew that it was the only way. If the military gained control of the tuning device, Corey's power would be used against them all. The world they had known would cease to exist. Are you sure about this? Todd asked, his voice hoarse. Annie nodded, her eyes filled with determination. I'm sure. We can't let them have him. He's our son, Todd. We protect him at all costs. She took a deep breath before turning to Corey. Corey, I need you to trust me. This is the only way. Corey looked between his parents, confusion and fear clouding his young face. But what will happen to me? What if I can't hear anymore? The question stung Annie's heart, but she forced herself to stay strong. You'll be okay, Corey, she said, her voice trembling. We're doing this to protect you. We love you, and we will always protect you, no matter what. She placed a hand on his cheek. The warmth of her touch meant to soothe him, even as her heart ached with the weight of the sacrifice she was about to make. Todd stepped forward, the decision now set in stone. I'll handle it, he said, his voice filled with grim resolve. You stay here with Corey. I'll make sure no one gets to the device. Annie nodded, though her heart was heavy with the thought of what they were about to do. She knew that once Todd took action, there would be no going back. The distant voices grew closer, and the pressure to act became unbearable. Todd took a deep breath, his hand hovering over the device that had caused so much turmoil. This is it, he muttered to himself. For you, Corey. For us. He placed the device on the floor and stepped back, his mind racing. The decision had been made. There was no turning back now. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and Todd knew they were out of time. The military would be here in minutes, and they had to act fast. Annie and Corey watched in silence as Todd reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, compact explosive, something he had kept hidden for situations like this. You'll be safe now, he whispered to himself. He wasn't just destroying the device. He was destroying everything that had brought them to this moment, his loyalty to the military, his past as an officer, and his relationship with the life he thought he knew. The explosion was deafening, a bright flash of light that shook the walls around them. Todd's eyes burned as the blast sent a shockwave through the room. He felt the heat on his face, his chest tightening as the reality of the destruction settled over him. The device was gone. The future they had feared, the one where the military controlled Corey's powers, had been destroyed in an instant. But the cost of that destruction was a price he would have to live with for the rest of his life. Annie rushed to Todd's side, pulling him into a tight embrace. It's done, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. We're free. But as she looked at Corey, standing silently beside them, she knew that freedom came at a high cost. They had no idea what would happen next, but the future was now a terrifying unknown. Corey stepped forward, his face somber as he looked at the remnants of the device. Did I do the right thing? He asked quietly, his voice full of uncertainty. Annie knelt down beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. You didn't do anything wrong, Corey, she said softly. You did what we needed to do to protect you. We all did. The sound of military footsteps grew nearer, and Todd's heart pounded in his chest. They had destroyed the device, but the military would still come for them. They would stop at nothing to take control of the power they had unleashed. Todd, Annie, and Corey had no choice but to keep moving. The war had only just begun, and the true cost of their choices was still to be revealed. Corey stood on the edge of understanding, a place where the lines between awe and fear blurred. The vibrations that had once overwhelmed him now felt more like an extension of himself. He could hear the hum of electricity beneath the floorboards, the subtle shift of air as someone walked a few feet away, even the deep, rhythmic pulse of his own heartbeat. The world around him was alive in a way he had never imagined, a symphony of sensation that was both beautiful and terrifying. With each breath, he felt the power building inside him, the knowledge that he could control the very frequencies of life, could shape the world with just a thought. But it was more than just hearing. It was a deep, visceral connection to everything around him. Corey could feel the stones in the walls of the house, the trees outside swaying in the wind, the vibrations of the distant city that stretched far beyond his immediate surroundings. He was no longer just hearing sound, he was experiencing the very essence of what it meant to exist in the world. For the first time in his life, he felt like he truly belonged to the world, like everything was linked to him in ways no one could understand. But that power, as extraordinary as it was, also carried with it an undeniable weight. Corey was acutely aware of the danger in his new abilities. The tuning device, which had unlocked these powers, had been designed to amplify human potential, to enhance their sensory capabilities to unimaginable levels. But the consequences of wielding such power were still unclear, and the realization of his potential both thrilled and terrified him. How long would it be before the world came to see him as a threat? How long before he couldn't control it anymore? Annie watched Corey from across the room, her heart aching as she saw the turmoil on his face. She had always known that Corey was capable of more than the world had given him credit for. But now, as she saw him come to terms with his new reality, she felt a deep fear creep into her heart. She had been trying to protect him for so long, but the truth was that the power inside him could change everything for better or for worse. It was a gift, yes, but it was also a curse, a burden that neither she nor Todd could fully understand. As Corey continued to focus, his hands shaking slightly as he reached out toward the table, a glass of water began to ripple. He didn't touch it, but he could feel the vibrations through the air, and as he concentrated, the glass slowly lifted off the table, floating in midair. Annie gasped, stepping back in shock, but Corey was too lost in the sensation to notice. He was fascinated by the way the vibrations responded to his thoughts, the way the world obeyed him in ways he never thought possible. Todd, who had been silent until now, finally stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Corey, stop." The word broke through Corey's focus like a splash of cold water, and the glass dropped back onto the table with a loud clink. Corey's face flushed with embarrassment, but Todd's expression was unreadable. "You don't understand what this means, son. You can't just control everything around you like this. It's too dangerous." Annie stepped between them, her voice calm but firm. "Todd, he's not a weapon. He's not dangerous." But even as she spoke the words, she knew that was only partly true. The power Corey had now was unlike anything anyone could have predicted. It wasn't just a gift, it was something far more dangerous than either of them had anticipated. The device had unlocked his potential, but it had also revealed the fragile line between creation and destruction. Todd's gaze softened, but his concern remained. "I didn't sign up for this. I didn't raise him to be," he cut off, unable to finish the thought. "This isn't just about us anymore. This is about something much bigger." Annie turned to Corey, her heart breaking at the confusion in his eyes. "You're right, Todd," she said quietly, her voice tinged with regret. "It's bigger than us. And now we have to figure out what to do with this power before someone else decides for us." Corey, still shaken, nodded. He understood the weight of the words, but he wasn't sure he was ready to accept the responsibility that came with them. His entire life had been lived in silence, and now he was faced with a power that could either change the world or destroy it. He didn't know how to control it yet, didn't know what it meant for his future. But what he did know was that the world he had known was gone, and there was no turning back. As the family stood there, the air around them seemed to vibrate with an energy they couldn't explain. The room was charged with a sense of foreboding, and even the stillness of the night outside felt like it was waiting for something to happen. Annie looked at Todd, and for the first time in a long time, they both shared a look of uncertainty. Their son was no longer the boy they had known. He was something more, something they couldn't control. But at that moment, they both realized that no matter how much they tried to protect him, Corey's power was his own. And it was up to them to help him learn how to wield it, or face the consequences. "Mom?" Corey's voice broke through the silence, filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "What happens now?" Annie turned to him, her heart swelling with love for the boy who had once been so silent, so trapped. Now he was a symbol of something far greater, and she had no idea where this journey would lead them. "We figure it out together, Corey," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "We always figure it out together." Todd stepped forward, his hand resting on Corey's shoulder. "You're not alone in this, son. We'll protect you, we'll protect each other." But even as he said the words, the realization hit them both. Protecting Corey from the outside world was one thing. But protecting him from himself, from the power inside him, would be the true test. Annie's heart tightened as she watched the love and uncertainty flash between father and son. She knew that they were on the precipice of something monumental, something that could either heal the world or tear it apart. The tuning device had unlocked Corey's potential, yes, but it had also unleashed a future neither of them were ready for. And as the quiet night pressed in around them, Annie felt the gravity of what they had to face. The power within Corey was far beyond anything they had prepared for, and the world, and the military, would soon come knocking. But for now, they would hold on to the only thing they had left, each other. Do you think Corey will be able to control his powers, or will they consume him? What do you think the family should do to help him? If you're intrigued by Corey's growing abilities and what the family will face next, make sure to subscribe. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. How do you think the family will handle the consequences of unlocking such power? Todd sat at the edge of the table, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on the floor. The weight of his past, the guilt that had been suffocating him for days, felt almost unbearable now. His mind was consumed by the consequences of his choices that had led to Corey's current state, choices that had set the wheels of fate in motion. He had never thought he would find himself here, standing in the shadow of his own mistakes, watching his son come to terms with a power neither of them understood. But as the reality of the situation settled in, Todd knew one thing for certain: there was no turning back now. "Corey," Todd said, his voice low but steady. The boy looked up at him, his face a mixture of confusion and anticipation. Todd's heart ached as he saw the uncertainty in his son's eyes, but there was something else there too, something that had been missing for so long. A spark. A glimmer of understanding that Corey, for the first time, was beginning to see himself not as a victim, but as someone who could shape the future. He had always lived in the silence of his world, trapped by his inability to hear, but now he had the power to bridge that gap, and Todd was determined to help him find a way to do it without losing himself in the process. "I need you to understand something, son," Todd continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I failed you. All these years, I thought I was doing the right thing, following orders, serving my country. But I see now that I was wrong. I helped create the very thing that has put you in danger." He paused, the weight of his words hanging in the air like an anchor. "But I swear to you, Corey, I will protect you. I will protect you from the people who want to use you, from the forces that want to control you. No more secrets. No more lies." Corey's gaze softened, his eyes searching his father's face for the sincerity he desperately needed to see. It wasn't easy for Todd to admit his mistakes, to acknowledge the ways in which he had failed as a father, but the truth was undeniable. Todd had been a part of the project that had unleashed this power in his son, and now it was up to him to help Corey harness it for good, to ensure that his abilities were not used as a weapon, but as a force for change. As Corey began to process his newfound understanding of the world, Todd could see the shift in him. The boy who had once been silent, the boy who had been trapped by his condition, was now becoming something more. Something extraordinary. Annie, who had been standing in the doorway, watching the father and son exchange these words, felt a weight lift from her chest. She had always known that Todd's guilt was eating him alive, but now she saw that he was ready to take responsibility for his role in all of this. It wasn't about making up for lost time, it was about moving forward together. She moved toward Todd, her hand resting gently on his shoulder as she looked at their son. "We've come this far, Todd. And we'll keep going. Together." Corey looked between his parents, a mixture of emotions crossing his face. He had always been told that he was different, that his condition was something to be fixed. But now, for the first time, he understood that his difference wasn't a flaw. It wasn't something to be ashamed of or hidden. His silence had been a prison, but his power, the ability to feel the world in ways no one else could, was the key to something much greater. He was no longer just a boy who couldn't hear. He was someone who could change the course of history. "I don't know what to do with all of this," Corey said, his voice quiet, uncertain. "I can hear, but not like other people. I feel everything. The world is so much more than I ever knew." Annie crouched down beside him, her hand on his, grounding him in the moment. "It's okay to be scared," she said gently. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. But you're not alone in this, Corey. You never will be." Todd's mind was spinning with the implications of what Corey could do. The tuning device, the one that had unlocked this new reality for Corey, had been designed to amplify human potential, to enhance sensory perception to unimaginable levels. But what did that mean for the future? If Corey could feel the world, could he also influence it? Could he change the very fabric of reality with the vibrations he controlled? The possibilities were endless and yet so terrifying. Todd's military training had taught him to think in terms of strategy, of control, but this was beyond strategy. This was something entirely new. "We need to figure out what this means, Corey," Todd said, his voice calm but filled with urgency. "You can't do this alone. You have to learn to control it. The world won't understand, and there are people out there who will want to use you for their own purposes." Corey nodded, the weight of his father's words settling over him. He wasn't just a boy anymore. He was something far more. Something that could shape the world, for better or for worse. "I don't want to be a weapon," Corey whispered, his voice breaking. Annie's heart clenched at the pain in his words, but she leaned down, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "You won't be, Corey. You're not a weapon. You're a bridge. A bridge between the past and the future. Between what was and what could be." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything they had been through. Everything they had yet to face. Todd stood up, his eyes filled with a new resolve. "We'll find a way to make sure this power doesn't destroy you, son. We'll figure it out together. No one is going to use you. Not again." He turned to Annie, his gaze steady. "We need to prepare. The world is going to change, but we need to be ready. For whatever comes next." Corey stood up slowly, his feet uncertain, but his heart growing stronger with every passing second. He was no longer the boy who had been trapped in silence. He was no longer the boy who had been hidden away, ignored, forgotten. He was the boy who could change the world, and the weight of that truth was both thrilling and terrifying. But one thing was clear: he wasn't going to face this alone. His parents, his family, were with him every step of the way. "I'm ready," Corey said quietly, his voice filled with a quiet determination that surprised even him. "I don't know how, but I'll learn. I'll figure it out." Annie smiled, pride filling her heart. She had always known that Corey was destined for greatness, but hearing him say those words filled her with a sense of hope she hadn't realized she'd lost. Together, as a family, they stood on the edge of something unknown, a new future. The world, with all its uncertainty and fear, was waiting for them. But they were no longer just running from the past. They were ready to face whatever came next. The night was still, save for the occasional rustle of leaves outside their safe house. The family sat in the quiet, the weight of everything that had happened still settling over them. Annie, Todd, and Corey had come a long way, but the future was still uncertain, its edges jagged and unfocused. They had fought through so much already: betrayal, guilt, fear, but they knew the hardest battles were still to come. The military was relentless, and even now, they could feel the eyes of the world upon them, watching, waiting for a chance to strike. Corey looked out the window, his eyes tracing the movements of the wind through the trees, his thoughts a whirlwind of uncertainty. He had spent most of his life trapped in silence, a world of isolation and confusion. Now he could hear, but it was more than just hearing. His abilities went beyond anything he had ever imagined: the power to feel, to understand vibrations, to connect with the world in ways that were both thrilling and terrifying. He had always felt different, but now he understood just how different he truly was. And with that understanding came a weight, a responsibility that he wasn't sure he was ready for. Annie watched him, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and fear. She had always known that Corey was destined for greatness, that he had something inside him that the world couldn't yet comprehend. But as his mother, it was hard to imagine the dangers he would face as he came to terms with his new reality. The military, the government, they would stop at nothing to control him, to use him for their own purposes. They had already destroyed his innocence once, and now they would try to destroy his future. But Annie also knew that they had something stronger than any weapon or power. They had each other. They were a family, united in their determination to protect Corey, to protect what they had built together. No matter what the future held, no matter how much the world tried to tear them apart, They would face it together. "We've made it this far," she said quietly, her voice filled with resolve. "We'll keep going. Whatever comes next, we'll handle it. Together." Todd, who had been silent for most of the evening, nodded, his jaw tight. He had seen the fear in Annie's eyes, the uncertainty in Corey's, and he knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy. He had spent years following orders, doing what he was told. But now he was following his heart. Protecting his family, protecting Corey, was the only mission that mattered. He had betrayed them once by being part of the military project that led to Corey's abilities. But he wouldn't do it again. He wouldn't let the world destroy his son. Corey turned to look at his father, his gaze steady. "I don't know what's going to happen next, Dad," he said, his voice quiet but filled with determination. "But I know I can't do this alone. I need you. Both of you." Todd's heart swelled as he looked at his son, realizing that this journey, this fight, was as much about Corey's growth as it was about their own redemption. They had been broken by the past, but together, they had the chance to rebuild. The silence between them grew comfortable, a shared understanding settling in. They were stronger than they had ever been, not because of their power or their past, but because they had each other. In a world that had tried to tear them apart, they had fought back together. And no matter what came next, they knew they could face it, as long as they stood united. But even as they found comfort in each other's presence, the shadow of the military's pursuit loomed large. Todd had tried to convince himself that they could outrun their past, but deep down, he knew it was only a matter of time before the military came for them again. And this time, they would be ready. They had to be. Corey looked up at the ceiling, his thoughts drifting to the future. What did it mean to have this power? What was his role in a world that didn't understand him? He had always been told that he was broken, that he needed to be fixed. But now, for the first time, he realized that maybe he wasn't broken at all. Maybe he was exactly what the world needed. But how could he use his abilities without becoming the very thing they feared? Could he use his power to change the world, or would the world change him? "Mom, Dad," Corey said, breaking the silence. His voice was soft but strong. "What if I can do something with this? What if I can make the world better? Maybe I'm not meant to just survive. Maybe I'm meant to help." Annie and Todd exchanged a look, both realizing that their son had already started to take ownership of his future, his abilities, and his place in the world. Annie smiled, her eyes filled with pride. "Corey, you've always been special. We'll help you figure it out, every step of the way. Whatever you choose, we'll be here." Todd nodded, his expression unwavering. "We'll support you, son. But remember, with power comes responsibility. You can change the world, but you also have to protect it." Corey nodded, the weight of their words sinking in. He wasn't just a boy who could hear. He was something more, something that could shape the future. But the future wasn't just about him. It was about all of them. Together. And as they stood there, on the edge of an uncertain tomorrow, they knew that the real journey was only just beginning. The family sat together in the quiet of the room, the world outside still and silent, as if holding its breath. The future was unwritten, a canvas waiting to be filled with the choices they made. And for the first time in a long time, Corey felt a sense of peace, knowing that no matter what came next, he wasn't alone. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. There's another interesting one on your left screen that I think you'll really enjoy.